either 60. Now we're passing a cone over the bridge. Negative. We're going to take a right on Southeast 44th Place.
Saving lives or encouraging dangerous behavior. Lawmakers are facing a number of questions relating to when police can engage in a vehicle pursuit. Hello and welcome to The Impact. I'm Mike McClanahan. House Bill 1054 took effect in mid-2021, restricting a range of police tactics and creating a higher threshold for pursuits. Under the new law, before an officer, deputy, or trooper can engage in a high-speed chase, they must have probable cause that someone in a vehicle has committed a violent or sexual crime or escape offense. Officers can also pursue a vehicle if the driver is suspected of driving under the influence.
Okay, got a unit right behind him, Southeast 63rd, going up the hill. Got a unit following him.
Under the old law enforcement officers could pursue a vehicle that refuses to stop based on a reasonable suspicion that the individual was involved in a crime. Opponents of the change believe it's a driving factor behind an increase in property crimes like auto theft. Civil rights and police accountability organizations are pushing back on proposed changes to the 2021 law. The Washington Coalition for Police Accountability points to a drop in the number of pursuit-related fatalities as proof that the policy is saving lives. However, groups like the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs say the theft trends are undoubtedly linked to the knowledge that police are limited in their ability to give chase. They also highlight a critique of the data that's being used to justify support for the policy change as incomplete and inconclusive. House Bill 1363 would eliminate the probable cause element that officers must be able to meet before chasing a suspect and replace it with a reasonable suspicion standard. Officers could pursue if they have reasonable suspicion that a person in the vehicle has committed or is committing any criminal offense. The bill is sponsored by Democratic Representative Alicia Rule and Republican Representative Eric Robertson. Senate Bill 5533, sponsored by former state trooper and Democratic Senator John Lovick, would create a model vehicle pursuit policy work group within the Criminal Justice Training Commission and create a law enforcement technology grant program related to modern vehicle pursuit management technology. Democratic Representative Roger Goodman has introduced a similar bill in the House with a shorter timeline for implementation, HB 1586. Earlier this week, lawmakers heard testimony on various bills proposed in response to concerns over the issue of vehicle pursuit policies.
Things like a spike in crime rates, motor vehicle thefts, people not complying when the police try to stop them. It's not the pursuit law that is causing these problems, and rolling back the pursuit law is not going to fix these problems.
3 days into my job as sheriff, I pursued someone for DUI who passed by me and rolled his window down and stopped and said, "I know you guys can't chase me. Stop chasing me," and then sped off. So they become emboldened. They're very brazen in what they're doing.
Still ahead, hear from two lawmakers with bills to address the pursuit issue, including the chair of the House committee that's hearing the different options. Stay with us. Joining me now, Democratic Chair of the House Community Justice, Safety, and Reentry Committee, Representative Roger Goodman of Kirkland, and Republican co-sponsor of House Bill 1363, Representative Eric Robertson of Sumner. Thank you both for being here. For our viewers, Representative Robertson has an extensive law enforcement background, and Representative Goodman is an attorney with significant experience working in the judicial system and on previous legislative task forces centered on law enforcement policies. So I'd like to hear from each of you about what the probable cause standard requires officers to have before engaging in a pursuit. And I'd like to start with you, Representative Robertson. What does that mean for a law enforcement officer today?
As a law enforcement officer, a county sheriff's deputy or a state trooper, it means that you have to have evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual, named individual, has committed a crime and which crime, and you have to have at that point the ability to arrest and confine that individual.
From your perspective, what does it mean?
Well, the plain understanding of it, and in the context of police vehicle pursuits, would be if the police see a car driving away, but they don't know for sure who's driving it, they don't have probable cause. They only have reasonable suspicion. If they see the person getting into the car who has just committed a criminal offense, then they have probable cause, because they know that that's the person who committed the criminal offense, and then they could pursue, and that under current law that they could pursue.
So there is legislation or proposed legislation out there that would go to a reasonable suspicion standard. Basically, it would require a lower threshold before officers could chase a suspect. You've sponsored a bill to establish a work group within the Criminal Justice Training Commission, and I believe it would also set up a technology grant program to deal with that issue as well. And you know, as an attorney, as the chair of the House committee that's hearing this legislation, why that approach?
Well, there are two approaches. One is to put in law amended pursuit policy, and that's not mutually exclusive, though, of gathering the experts around the table in a more deliberate fashion after this legislative session is done, to take a critical look at vehicle pursuits and whether the policy should be amended and to make recommendations back to the legislature. So we're considering two bills. One bill lowers from probable cause down to reasonable suspicion the threshold for when a pursuit can begin. And then the other bill is the bill that I have introduced to set up a consultative process with all the experts sitting at the Criminal Justice Training Commission to make legislative recommendations to the legislature on what the optimum vehicle pursuit policy should be.
And Representative Robertson, you and Democratic Representative Alicia Rule have sponsored legislation that would instate the reasonable suspicion standard. It's something that various law enforcement groups have been pushing for. Why that approach?
Well, it is a similar approach to decades-old policy, and that's what folks had been trained to in the law enforcement community. As an example, we had a case on the West Hill of Auburn where a gentleman in an apartment complex looks out, sees someone entering his truck, his work truck, and is watching the person attempting to steal the truck, gets on the phone with 911. The person is actually taking the truck, driving it out as law enforcement's coming into the complex, but they can't even initiate a stop because that person, they don't have the probable cause to charge that individual with theft because they don't even know who it is. So those are the situations that we're trying to address, which were loudly shared during the deliberations of 2021 and summarily, dismissed during that session. So we want to bring it back to the previous standard that worked well for so many years. And I also don't object to, and I don't think anybody objects to taking a longer look at it. But what we need to do right now is fix what's broken and then study it and refine it.
What do you think about that approach about taking action now?
Well, a lot of folks are saying we got it wrong the first time. I do believe we should adjust. I support adjusting the threshold from probable cause down to reasonable suspicion for pursuits of those who have committed violent offenses where there's been grievous injury or death. But I don't think, I know in my Democratic caucus in the House that we probably wouldn't have the votes to lower to reasonable suspicion the pursuit for any criminal offense. That's too broad. Vehicle pursuits are inherently very dangerous. And since the enactment of the vehicle pursuit restrictions, we've seen a significant reduction in deaths, particularly bystanders who would have been killed in the course of a pursuit. So there's some good news. But I've heard from mayors and police chiefs and citizens, business owners, that we didn't get it right the first time. And I'm worried we don't get it right again. On the fly, in a politically charged legislative session with limited time, I really would rather delegate it to the experts to sit in a deliberate and an inclusive fashion, make sure everybody's around the table, to come up with a vehicle pursuit policy that they know will work because they're the professionals, they're the ones working in the field.
So are there unanswered questions about the implications of this policy in terms of what other outcomes may be linked to this?
Well, I would say that we've had 2 years of experience that have shown and very much illuminated the fact that it was broken and we need to fix it. As an example, the folks that are putting out the message that there's a reduction in deaths due to vehicular pursuits, what we've done essentially is put the criminal in charge. They're the ones. All you got to do is turn on the 5 o'clock news and you see the dash cam and the body cam of law enforcement officers attempting to stop criminals in the midst of a criminal act and they drive away. They're driving up over curbs and they're speeding away, causing great danger on the other end of the spectrum. And so if you look at the balance there, we're measuring one thing and we're ignoring another. And that's why if we go with the reasonable suspicion standard, law enforcement officers will be able to stop people, perhaps pursue, and detain them to where they can investigate and achieve that probable cause standard to get these people charged in the court system and potentially held accountable for the criminal acts that they've committed.
And there is the argument from particularly law enforcement agencies that want to see some change, that there is sort of a general knowledge out there that pursuits are not something that you can necessarily expect, depending on what type of criminal activity is happening. Do you think that there is the chance that has emboldened criminals and that could potentially lead to unanticipated harms related to just additional activity that they might not have otherwise have engaged in?
The word has certainly gotten out. It's important to note that there was no vehicle pursuit policy at all in Washington State before we enacted the reforms in 2021. About 24 other states actually have nothing on their books. It's sort of free reign for police. As a matter of fact, some states have statutes that allow police to ignore speed limits and other rules of the road when engaging in pursuit. So that's going the opposite direction. But what I find regrettable, I didn't hear an outcry from the police chiefs and the police agencies in the area that I represent. I represent the suburbs to the east of Seattle. That whole area of the central Puget Sound is a very densely populated, congested area, and the existing vehicle pursuit policies of those police agencies are actually more restrictive of what we enacted into law. So I didn't hear any outcry from my area. But there were police agencies in the outlying areas who were not happy and issued news releases and held news conferences and had pre-printed pamphlets handing out to citizens, this is the legislature's fault. That is regrettable, that some in the police actually politicized needlessly public safety and perhaps even endangered public safety by advertising widely, we can't chase you, when in fact the existing policies were already in place. They were already very restrictive. So let's get beyond that and let's move to fashioning a responsible policy for the state. But it's been a difficult period to go through.
What's your perspective on that?
Well, certainly the congested areas of the east side, it may not be an area that you'd want to engage in a pursuit. Well, but it also depends on the time of day, the road conditions, the weather, and things of that sort. And some agencies may choose to have a no pursuit policy, which they do. But I can tell you, what is good in Buckley and Blaine may not be what's good in Bellevue. So we need to really quit looking at it from our little community standpoint. We need to look at it, we're creating statewide policy. And we need our local communities to be able to make those decisions. We need to build a fence around it with things like you need reasonable suspicion, you need to have training, you need to have a supervisor notified, you need to have a situation where you evaluate other means to terminate that pursuit, like spike strips or the pursuit intervention technique and things of that sort. Build that as statewide policy, and then let the locals adopt the policy as to whether or not they're going to, and maybe even make it more restrictive at the local level. But don't ratchet down all of rural Washington and stuff because Kirkland didn't like it.
During the course of this discussion, sort of inside and outside the legislature, there's been this debate playing on about what the data shows, what we have, what we don't have. And there have been sort of critiques of data that seem to suggest, or that suggest that this policy has saved lives. And there's also been critiques of data that suggest that this policy may be linked to a significant increase in auto theft. Is there conflicting data from your perspective?
There is. There's data showing that, as I had just made reference to, reduction in the number of deaths directly as a result of a pursuit. But there also have been deaths, and there was testimony in my committee resulting from people driving away, knowing they can drive away, but driving away too fast, and then resulting in deaths as well. So really on both sides, it has endangered the public. The vehicle theft issue is actually linked historically to the value of used cars. And the value of used cars in the last, since the pandemic, has increased about 30%. Anyone who's gone out to try to buy a used car probably sees that. And we see the lines following each other very closely over the course of time, where when the value of used cars goes up, vehicle theft goes up. The other thing is that vehicle theft has one of the lowest clearance rates. We very rarely find someone and engage in prosecution and holding them accountable. So I am fairly confident that my caucus, the majority of my caucus in the House, would not want to authorize chasing stolen cars, because on balance that would endanger the public more than the risk of not apprehending the person. So that's a careful balance we have to strike.
What's your perspective on that?
Well, having the ability to pursue and the message out to these criminals that have become wholly emboldened and now just feel like they have a free rein out in our communities, that has, I believe, increased auto theft. Certainly the value of cars is great, but if you know that you're not going to be able to be chased and that you're likely going to get away with it, that's a real incentive for the criminal element. And as far as the danger in pursuits, I quite frankly, I would put my money on and want to have the trained men and women of law enforcement in charge of high-speed chases over letting the criminals run away recklessly and dangerously from crime scenes and away from law enforcement attempting to stop and question them any day of the week.
In terms of, if we could go back to the bill, the idea of creating a technology grant and looking into high-tech solutions to this issue, what sorts of ideas are out there related to that?
Well, there are all sorts of technologies. I'm trying to remember one where you can shoot something and it'll stick to the car, and so it'll follow the car, and you can...
Star Chaser.
Is that what it's called?
Maybe.
But yeah, other technologies, including cameras, drones, and so forth, where police could more safely track the path of a fleeing potential offender rather than chase through the streets. So yeah, we want to provide some funding to make those technologies available to police agencies. But I wanted to comment on the conflict over data. We're disputing what really is the truth, and to me that makes it even more risky that the legislature would enact a law based on conflicting facts. I think it's more incumbent on us than to send it to the Criminal Justice Training Commission to convene all the experts and figure out first what the facts are, and then how to, what recommendations to make legislatively for the legislature in the next session to enact into law. I don't know if we would be legislating responsibly if there's so much disagreement about what the basic facts are.
Do you think there's enough disagreement to warrant waiting?
I think the fact is crime has skyrocketed over the past 2 years, and we have evidence of people phoning 911 and saying, hey, tell that police officer behind me that he's not allowed to pursue me. That's a fact, that we've created a policy decision and applied it statewide unnecessarily, in my opinion, to allow criminals to be in charge. I think we need to, like I said earlier, I think we need to go back to reasonable suspicion for criminal activity to be able to attempt to stop and then, if necessary, pursue in a responsible manner, and then continue to look at the data as to perfecting the policy. I also think that local jurisdictions, many of them, the one that I worked for, the Washington State Patrol, had a very strict pursuit policy all the way back into the 80s and through the 90s and to current before this change. We should have every agency and every community have a policy in place, and model policies can be developed for those people those communities that want to have pursuit to a certain degree. And of course, communities can ban them as well. If just overall, it's a situation like on the east side where it's very congested, very populous, but if you're down in Benton City, you can effectively and safely, in many cases, engage in a vehicular pursuit to catch a criminal.
And just in your daily course of business in the legislature, have you had an opportunity to reach out to your Senate counterpart? Any word on what the appetite might be in the Senate related to proposals moving forward?
That's another calculation that we have to make. Are we going to be wasting our time coming up with a refined policy in the House, sending it over to the other body, and won't even give it due consideration? But with each passing moment, we were just talking about the increase in crime. There's been an increase in crime in many different categories across the country. Some are asserting that the restriction on vehicle pursuits has been one of the causes of the increases in crime, and that's in dispute as well. And so I really think that because of our inability to agree on the causes and the data, that we should delegate it to the experts. And I've taken a look at the state laws across the country of those who have put vehicle pursuit policies in place, and all but one state have delegated this task to what they call the POST, the Police Officer Standards and Training Commission. Ours is the Criminal Justice Training Commission, to do the work. So we would be following many states by that deliberate, inclusive, respectful process outside of the heated legislative debate.
So briefly, we're running in on the close of the segment here, but if you could, do you have any plans to exec, or rather, are we going to see 1363 in the executive?
I would like to report 1363, the big bill, setting a new policy in place. I would like to report that out of my committee. I will probably, I don't know how many votes I have for, I know I don't have a majority of votes in my caucus on my committee to report the bill out as is. So it is going to have to be narrowed. Last year, it was a very similar process where I narrowed a vehicle pursuit proposal down to allowing for pursuits when there's reasonable suspicion. You actually don't know who's driving the car, but you have a pretty good sense. There's a dead body lying there, there's a car driving away. You're pretty sure, but you don't have the level of probable cause. I think that should be pursued. Again, where it's violent offenses, sex offenses, someone escaping from prison, escaping from jail, or a DUI, impaired drivers. So there are some cases where I do believe we should give police more flexibility, but not as broad sweeping as the current bill is. So I will try to report that bill out of my committee.
If you could, can you encapsulate your closing thoughts in 30 seconds or so?
Well, vehicle pursuits are a police tactic that was called into question when we engaged in the comprehensive police reforms. We didn't quite get it right. This is an unresolved issue, and we absolutely need to address it. And I think we're doing the responsible thing by looking at a specific proposal, but also looking at the option of delegating it to the experts. Those two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So both bills might in fact move through the House. It's hard to predict, but I do intend to report both bills out of my committee. The large bill will become a little bit smaller, but we'll see if we can come up with a good policy.
If you could encapsulate your closing thoughts in about 30 seconds.
Well, I appreciate Representative Goodman's work on this and his approach to get something out of committee and to advance the topic. And I agree that it's not a bad thing to continue to study it and refine the bill as we approach the next session and the session after that, perhaps. What I don't agree with is not hearing the bill, and that's what we're hearing from our counterparts in the Senate. Just blatantly not listening is not what we're here in Olympia for. They need to hopefully hear House Bill 1363, take it under consideration, listen to the constituencies that are out there, and do the right thing.
We'll have to leave it there. Again, thank you, Representative Goodman and Representative Robertson. We appreciate your perspective. Thank you for watching. Please join us next week for more in-depth interviews you won't find anywhere else. From all of us here at TVW, take care and have a great week.